is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Li Jianhua. Our top stories. Robust results buoyed by rising interest rates. HSBC sees its profits more than double in the first half of the year.
France pulls its citizens out of Niger after its coup following protests and attacks on the French embassy in the capital, Niamey.
20 people killed and dozens more missing as torrential rains and flooding batter northern China for a fourth day.
And China are out of the Football Women's World Cup, losing 6-1 to England, who progressed to the knockout round.
HSBC's profits have surged, powered by internal cost-cutting and rising global interest rates. Europe's biggest bank saw pre-tax profits reach $8.8 billion in the second quarter of this year. That's almost double the same period in 2022. Revenue soared to $16.7 billion, beating expectations. Looking at the first 6 months of the year, the figures are even more robust. The profits for that period more than double those seen in 2022, exceeding $21.7 billion. Revenue for January to June was close to $37 billion, nearly two-thirds of that coming from the bank's operations in Asia.
The bank says the results are down to interest rate rises, plus its retail banking business. And bosses are bullish on near-term profitability, launching a $2 billion share buyback. But warnings remain over an uncertain economic outlook. Well, joining us here in the studio to talk about this is Justin Urquhart-Stewart, the investment manager and business commentator. Great to have you back in the studio with us, Justin. So these look like pretty good numbers for HSBC, don't they? What are they doing right?
Well, these are cracking good figures. It's almost what they're not doing. They're not doing investment banking, which was the big fashion fad to have. Everyone wanted to be in investment banking, and guess who lost a lot of money? They lost some of it as well on that. But it's the retail side has done really so well. And in retail, the time you make money is when interest rates go up. When interest rates are at 0 or 1 or 2%, then your margin is nothing, because you've got to take money in and you're paying interest out, which is nothing. As soon as you get to 3, 4, 5%, your margin's there. And sometimes banks are not always that generous in giving money to depositors, so they're making extra amounts of this. So yes, now is a good time, but also I want to look very carefully at the amount they're making provisions, because now is the time, as interest rates go up, you'll start seeing some of the weaker businesses in the next year or so showing some pain. That's why they need to put some of this money aside for reserves, but these are cracking good figures.
Well, Justin, they have also bought the UK business of collapsed SVB, so what do you think that has done for them? That's
a very nice, almost say a freebie for them. They're in the right place at the right time to pick up a bank for, well, virtually nothing. It was virtually nothing. And it's going to have some problems in there, but nonetheless, what you had was a load of depositors, cash sitting in there, investment cash, people who are actually looking to try and get some reasonable returns. So, yes, they picked up a free bank with some risks. But actually, what you'll find is most of the American regulators have de-risked it. So, actually, they were in the right place at the right time. It's good to be lucky.
So, though, Asia business has done really well, hasn't it? But coming back to those interest rates, here in the UK, customers have been facing some pretty challenging times down to those, haven't they? And the bank, nevertheless, making some good profits out of them.
This is where banks have to be very careful, because they can sit there and saying, we're making money, and their poor customers are sitting there saying, hang on a second, my mortgage rate's going up. And when you've had a mortgage, and we've been used to in Britain, mortgage rates at 1%, 2%, which was actually very unfair, because those were emergency rates during the banking crisis in 2008. Now, for the first time in that period of time, now those rates have gone to 4%, 5%, 6%, and you see your monthly payments more than doubling, and someone will turn around and say, no one told me about this, and they're seeing a lot of pain. Meanwhile, the banks turn around and said, yes, but we've made a lot of profits. It's not very good in terms of PR. But you need to have strong banks, you need to have a good position. Now it's to the banks to make sure they give good messages out to those customers, say, we will do what is necessary to see you through this, because they can adjust in terms of capital repayments, interest only, all sorts of things they can try and do. If they don't do that, then they're going to find actually getting some very bad publicity coming their way. But HSBC aren't stupid.
And the investors must be very happy for that, right?
Oh, delighted. I mean, you just see what's happened in terms of the share price. Compare that with someone like Barclays, which I know really rather well, which is a classic example of how not to do it. And so, no, for HSBC, overall, I've always liked as a share to have. It's been through good times, bad times. It's spread around the world. It's actually focused on retail, but it's got good corporate business as well. But it avoided the fashion fads of the investment business to a great extent, and therefore didn't find itself in the troubles that the Americans had.
So away from profits for a moment, because HSBC are moving house, aren't they? They're leaving their London Canary Wharf headquarters where they've been for more than 20 years. What impact do you think that will have?
Well, it's fascinating when you see, actually, because all the banks went over to Canary Wharf because it was big and it was cheap. It was very cheap, and the city was obviously smaller and much more expensive. Funnily enough, that's sort of changed now. So a couple of things are happening, and you're seeing it in actually the big cities around the world, banks relocating to try and find smaller, more cost-effective areas. Some people are working from home. Sometimes the banks are going. We haven't seen the real effect of Brexit in London yet. Some of those banks, they won't go immediately. It's just over a period of 5 or 10 years, you'll suddenly find actually they're doing more investments elsewhere. But meanwhile, the likes of HSBC comes back to the City of London, finds itself with less staff in the whole time and with a much lower cost. And what does that mean? You've got better profits.
And Justin, so we have said that high interest rates have been good for HSBC. What about now that they are coming down? What's the outlook?
Well, actually, the next stage for this is what happens with the growth. Well, the growth we've had, actually, considering what's happened to the global economy over the past few years with pandemics and such like, has actually been quite remarkable. But now we're going to start seeing the position where inflation is actually now looking as though it's under better control, but there are still be concerns coming up. We've got of the issues in terms of supply, what happens over Russia and the war there in terms of grain and such like, and rice coming out of India. So there's some black clouds on the horizon there, but nonetheless, actually, it's better than it was last year. So the growth is there, but be prepared. Actually, we're going to start reaching the peak now. Those interest rates will start coming down again.
Justin, thank you very much for your insights. Justin McGrath-Stewart, an investment manager and business commentator.
Justin, thank you. BP's second quarter profits have slumped 70% from a year ago to $2.6 billion. The oil giant blamed falling oil and gas markets. Despite the worse-than-expected profits, BP is increasing shareholder dividends by 10%. Rivals Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell and Total Energy have also reported sharp drops in quarterly earnings.
Britain's biggest retailers have reported the first monthly fall in prices for 2 years. The British Retail Consortium said the prices were 0.1% lower in July than in June. It comes as shop price inflation falls to its lowest rate this year, sliding to 7.6%, down from 8.4% in June.
UK house prices fell at their fastest annual rate for 14 years in July, with a 3.8% decline year-on-year. That's according to British Building Society nationwide. The average price of a home in the UK now stands at over $330,000, 4.5% below the peak last August. Nationwide says high mortgage interest rates are discouraging home buyers.
Ride-hailing company Uber has recorded its first operating profit in its history. The American firm posted an operation earning of more than $320 million in the second quarter of this year. But the result still missed analysts' expectations. The company attributed its net gain partly to a 22% increase in trips on the platform.
The military governments of Burkina Faso and Mali have voiced support for the leaders of a coup in Niger. They warned that any military intervention in Niger would be considered a declaration of war against their two countries. It comes after Niger's military detained a number of senior politicians after seizing power last week. Those arrested include former government ministers.
France is evacuating its nationals and other European citizens from Niger. It follows anti-French protests and attacks on the French embassy in the capital Niamey. Our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris. Ross, how has the evacuation process been going so far?
Yeah, the latest is that those two planes heading to Niamey, we know that there is one there already being loaded up. People at the main airports in the Nigerian capital to be loaded onto that flight. And both of them should land back here in France local time very late on Tuesday or into the early hours of Wednesday morning, bringing French and non-French citizens back to Europe. We know that when there was the turmoil in Sudan earlier in the year, France laid on evacuation flights, not just for French people, but if you look at the passenger lists as well, you see just how many nationalities were on that flight, and it's probably likely to be something similar as well with France carrying people who are non-French back into Europe. We know that Germany has said, urging its citizens to get on to one of the French flights. There will also be a flight put on by the Italian authorities to bring back its citizens, although for the moment the UK not sending an evacuation flight. We have heard in the last few minutes from the head of the French General Staff, Thierry Bercon, and he has been saying that for the moment they are only envisaging a civilian evacuation. There are about 1,500 French troops already stationed in Niger, and while they will be helping and handling with the civilian evacuation, they will be staying where they are for the moment. The French Ministry of Defence not envisaging any pullback, any drawback of French troops from within Niger. The whole situation at the moment is obviously very tense, with civilians now trying to get out of Niger. And as Robin mentioned in the intro, those two warnings from the military juntas next door in the bordering countries of Mali and Burkina Faso about the fact that if there were to be armed intervention into Niger, that would be a declaration of war as far as the military leaders in Burkina Faso and Mali see it. So that pressure still coming on from the economic community of West African states and from France, the former colonial power, along with the European Union and the African Union, to restore the democratically elected Mohamed Bazoum to power. And while those negotiations and those conversations go on, and while the sanctions continue to be imposed, European countries are now taking the initiative of laying on flights for their citizens to be evacuated from inside Niger.
Thanks, Ross. That is our correspondent, Ross Cullen, in Paris.
Well, let's talk to Abiol Lualdeng, who's a Sahel analyst who is speaking to us from Cardiff, where I know she's paused her holiday to join us, so we appreciate your time again today. Good to have you with us. So as we heard, France now evacuating its citizens alongside other European citizens from Niger. What do you make of the level of tension between France and Niger at the moment?
Well, I think that it's a strong sign that the situation between France and the current junta of Niger is quite tense. France has categorically stated that the junta is illegitimate, so it seems that they will not be recognizing anything closely or directly related to this junta. On the other hand, the junta also seems to be stalling for time. One thing that I've noticed is that they tend to focus quite a lot on France in particular, whereas there is other Western military, for example, the United States present in Niger, but there's a laser focus on France. And I think that that's an attempt by them to decredibilize France as a stakeholder in any forward negotiations. And it also appeals to their populist base.
We didn't see similar evacuations after military coups in Burkina Faso and Mali, did we? Why is it different this time?
I think that the situation is, it's fluid, but it's obviously rapidly deteriorating. France has a very long history of cooperation and military presence in the Sahel. They've got quite a few troops on the ground in Niger. So if they feel that the situation is degenerating, then they probably have some very strong indicators that things could go quite badly. And we always have to remember in these type of contexts that there are other actors, non-state actors, such as extremists, Islamic extremists, and also even people smuggling gangs that operate, bringing migrants from other countries up to Europe through Niger.
So we've had the leaders of Burkina Faso and Mali coming out in support of the coup leaders in Niger. What does that suggest to you? Is there some kind of new regional alliance in the offing, potentially more instability?
Yes, I do think that the potential for more instability is high, and I do think that the fact that both Mali and Burkina Faso put out a joint statement suggests that, you know, these two countries have also been suspended from ECOWAS. So it suggests that they are also trying to put some more pressure on ECOWAS to back off. And in reality, in the ECOWAS, probably the country with the most leverage on on Niger is Nigeria, just because of the trade between the two countries. So I think that these two countries are joining forces to essentially endorse the coup is probably a sign that they intend to help Niger's current junta maintain power as long as possible, to the point that perhaps they announce a type of transition and they stop this. They stop any type of military intervention.
But the stated position from ECOWAS is basically the threat of force if the coup leaders in Niger don't reinstate the elected president. Is there any chance that this strategy could work?
Honestly, it could backfire on them. I think that the current situation, it seems to me that the junta, I mean, in my opinion, this coup d'etat is quite sophisticated, and I suspect that it has something to do with other elements of the Nigerian society, such as civil leaders, intellectuals, analysts, and other, not just military leaders, because they seem to be following some of the playbook of what happened in Sudan, which is that you might end up seeing that the democratically elected president or the civilian leader, such as in Sudan with al-Burhan, not with al-Burhan, with Hamdok, you might see that the president decides to resign and says, I no longer wish to be president of the country. And however, they will name a democratic transition. That will put the ECOWAS military intervention under more scrutiny and make it much more difficult. So who knows what could happen, honestly.
Abiol Luoldeng, Sahel analyst, great to speak to you today. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Welcome.
You're watching CGTN Still Ahead. And indeed now, Donald Trump says he expects to be charged soon over the investigation into the Capitol Hill riots.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Events
Received a target letter that happened on July 16th, saying he is the target of this investigation. Now, prosecutors generally only issue that kind of letter when they are pretty much convinced that they have sufficient evidence to bring charges against an individual. We also know that Trump's attorneys have met with the special counsel. So that sort of hints to us that things are further along in this case. But one of the biggest hints that something may be imminent came from Trump himself. He posted on his Truth social media account on Monday saying that indictment could be imminent. Quote, I assume that indictment from deranged Jack Smith and his highly partisan gang of thugs pertaining to my peacefully and patriotically speech will be coming out any day now, end quote. Now, he also goes on to say these charges are all a deflection tied to President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and his legal issues. But if an indictment is handed down, a third one, we still don't know what charges he may face. We do know that lots of witnesses have provided testimony. Lots of evidence have been gathered. But could an indictment, if there is one, be sealed? Could it be opened at arraignment, as has happened in the past? We just don't know. We'll have to wait and see. We do know this isn't the only legal woes he's faced. Just last week, 3 new charges were brought against him tied to that Mar-a-Lago case, tied to mishandling of documents. And then there could be an historic 4th indictment as handed down as soon as this month, that one tied to Georgia voting for the 2020 election. So he certainly has a lot going on, guys.
Karina, if he is indicted or arraigned for what would be, as you said, a 3rd time of the January the 6th riots, which case could be tried first? And it doesn't seem to affect his general election.
Oh, you're so right. And I mean, it's so interesting as well. Now, as far as the Mar-a-Lago case, there's just been another arraignment, Carlos de Oliveira, one of his aides. So that could mean that there needs to be more evidence collected, more testimony. That was set to go to trial in May. That could be pushed further out into the election season. But that indictment over hush money and Stormy Daniels, that is set to go to trial in March, so not too long from now. And then if there is an indictment handed down in this January 6th case, if sufficient evidence that witnesses have all been collected, that could go to trial very quickly as well, eating into his campaign time. But as you say, it doesn't seem to be deflecting too much because he is crushing the opposition in the GOP poll, 54% in the recent poll, tied to coming in well ahead of Ron DeSantis at 17%. And even more remarkable, in a general election poll, he is head-to-head with President Joe Biden, 43% apiece. So for right now, we can call him Teflon Trump, guys.
Thanks, Karina. That is our correspondent, Karina Mitchell in New York.
Myanmar's former leader Aung San Suu Kyi has had her jail term reduced after being pardoned on 5 of the 19 charges against her. She's been detained since February 2021, when the military ousted her democratically elected government. Our correspondent Patrick Falk reports.
Well, look, it's very difficult to say what sort of message the military government is trying to send with this move, but it certainly is a sudden development, and it's surprised many people as well. But as many observers will point out, this is really a meaningless move. As you say, Aung San Suu Kyi has only been pardoned on 5 of the 19 offences for which she's been convicted. She was serving a 33-year jail sentence. She's still being detained, and so it's not clear still how much time she still has to serve. As one diplomatic source put it, it is a cosmetic move, one to signal to the international community without, if you will, doing anything that's really substantive. It will be seen by countries that favour more engagement with the military government, most notably Thailand. As we know, Thailand's foreign minister recently visited Aung San Suu Kyi in secret in Naypyidaw, and that will be seen by many people as part of what's led to this recent development. It is a move that was also seen as undermining the ASEAN bloc in having a unified response to the crisis in Myanmar. But as I say, this is a development which perhaps doesn't have an awful lot of meaning to it. It is perhaps a call by the military government to signal to the international community to stop its isolation, and that it may be willing to provide further concessions if that's the case.
The Taliban has held its first direct talks with the United States since returning to power in Afghanistan 2 years ago. The meeting in Qatar saw the group raise the issue of Western sanctions and travel bans and the possible return of central bank assets held abroad. Washington said it was open to further talks on economic stability and combating drugs trafficking, and said it has raised concerns over human rights violations.
China has called on citizens to join the fight against spying. The country's Ministry of State Security has established a new platform on China's messaging app WeChat, allowing the public to report suspicious activity. A revised anti-espionage law took effect in July, broadening the definition of spying and expanding powers of investigation. Last month, the director of the CIA said the United States has made progress in rebuilding its spy networks in China.
At least 17 workers have been killed when a crane collapsed during the construction of a bridge in western India. Several others are feared trapped at the site about 80 kilometers from Mumbai. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has expressed condolences and offered government assistance for affected families.
You're watching Global Business Europe. Still to come. Fourth day of heavy rain brings severe flooding to northern China, leaving 20 people dead and dozens missing.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with me, Li Jianhua, and Robin Dwyer. The headlines again. Robust results buoyed by rising interest rates. HSBC sees its profits more than double in the first half of the year.
And France pulls its citizens out of Niger after its coup, following protests and attacks on the French embassy in the capital, Niamey. At least 20 people have died and dozens are missing in China's capital, Beijing, and the surrounding areas due to severe flooding. Heavy rain brought by Typhoon Doksuri continues to batter northern China. Emergency funding has been issued to boost rescue efforts in remote areas. Our correspondent Chen Mengfei is in the city of Zhuozhou near Beijing.
5 minutes before we went live, it started raining again. But for the most of the day, it was not raining. But it's important to stress that the situation on the ground is still volatile and is still very severe. I'll give you an example. When we got here about an hour ago, the water under my feet was about 2 to 3 meters back. And just within the last hour, even though it was not raining, the water level continued to rise. And what that says is that even though the heavy rainfall we're seeing right now might stop in an hour or so, but the flood pressure from upstream will continue to add pressure. All this water that's been fallen on the ground in the region the past few days will continue to add pressure in the region. And you can see behind me, it is a logistics hub where people's packages and mails have been completely flooded. But this is not the top concern for the government. As the Chinese presidency said today, the priority is to rescue people who are still missing. And, you know, as you mentioned, there have been already a dozen of casualties. Here in Zhuozhou, we know that there are still people trapped in their houses. The water is about 2 to 3 meters high, and, you know, it's really hard to do this rescue at night when it's really dark. Rescue volunteers from all over China have gathered here in the region. We've met all these people driving 6-7 hours with their boats that they, you know, fundraise for themselves in the region, and they're ready to start working, I'm sure, during the night and then tomorrow, first thing in the morning.
So this is obviously causing major disruption. What measures is the government taking to try and help?
As we speak, obviously the flood is a huge issue. So the governments around the region, they have been continue to do inspections of the drainage system. Earlier, we encountered, the police and the army forces reinforcing the riverbeds to prevent further flooding within the city. In the meantime, we heard top government ministries like the finance ministry releasing a fund to the governments in the region to help them with the rescue, with the rebuilding, and most importantly for people, hundreds of thousands of people have been relocated from their house and they need food, they need water. So the most basic supplies, these all have been issued by the government and the efforts are ongoing. It's 10 p.m. here in China and we're still seeing police officers and local administrative people all over the city just still trying to help people and still remain vigilant above all.
Lu Meiqi is from the China Meteorological Administration. She has told CGTN about the continuing heavy rainfall.
While the extreme rain really battered parts of northern China over the past few days, and this prolonged and widespread precipitation also shattered some records in some places like the county of Lincheng, Hebei province, where the annual amount is just 526, but this time we almost had around 1,000 within just 48 hours. Well, let's look at the culprits behind. You can see we had the remnants of Doksuri across Beijing, Tianjin-Hebei region, plus ample moisture coming from south, also including from the 6th Typhoon Canoe, which we will talk about later. But good to know is the rainfall is about to shrink down. For example, today we have some thundery showers and localized moderate to heavy rainfall. While looking to Wednesday and Thursday, there could be lower rain chances. For example, here in Beijing, we could anticipate some thundery showers from Tuesday to Thursday, but daily highs may surge into lower 30s once again.
Well, we've just heard about Typhoon Canoe, which is approaching Okinawa in southern Japan. Hundreds of flights have been cancelled and thousands of people advised to leave their homes. This is the 6th typhoon of the year, and it's already brought more heavy rain to the Philippines. The country is still feeling the effects of Typhoon Doksuri, which killed over a dozen people. Typhoon Canoe is expected to move across the East China Sea on Wednesday.
Northern Africa is just one of the many areas across the globe being impacted by heat waves. Wildfires have spread there, with Algeria being the worst affected. Egypt says the extreme temperatures have affected its capacity to pump natural gas and produce electricity. Our correspondent Adel El Marouki reports.
Out of all North African countries, Algeria has been suffering the most from extreme weather episodes. It lost 150,000 hectares of forest land to wildfires during the past 2 years. This summer, it's witnessing an expanded version of the phenomenon, which reached 16 states where 94 areas caught fire simultaneously.
The prime reason behind this phenomenon that hit our country is climate change. A rise in weather temperature led to extreme dryness in many areas. Algeria recorded 49 to 50 degrees Celsius in the north. That is what has led to these fires.
Responding swiftly to this rising danger, the Algerian authorities created a national plan to face major fires, enabling it to engage with the phenomenon efficiently. But the cost on the government is immense. At least 35 Algerians died and 1,500 displaced because of wildfires this year.
Algeria by law has to allocate all its financial and human resources to fight these fires. That included the armed forces, the civil defense teams, the forest authorities and NGOs. This led to record times in extinguishing these fires, some of which were controlled within 24 hours. The country is also legally obliged to provide health care to at least 375 people injured by the fires and to compensate them for any damage.
That is in addition to the ecological damage, which some experts say will take decades to regenerate. At least 9 countries on the Mediterranean Sea reported wildfires this year, including Tunisia and Morocco.
We recommend the creation of a joint Mediterranean task force to fight wildfires, so there would be international coordination for countries of the region. This cooperation could expand even further as the whole planet gets affected. Canada recently lost 10 million hectares of forest. That's the size of all Algeria's forest land and the agricultural areas combined.
Heat waves are sweeping the region and are no longer affecting the environment alone. This month, Egypt says that extreme heat has affected its ability to produce electricity and pump natural gas, leading to power cuts in urban and industrial areas alike, thus in a way affecting the country's economy. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
So far, the UK has escaped the worst of the record temperatures and the droughts which have been causing havoc across southern Europe.
But last year was a different story, and experts warn the country remains at risk. Our correspondent Michael Voss reports from southern England.
The southern counties of England are some of the driest and hottest parts of the country. So when garden designer Jane Gates moved into this converted barn with 2 acres of land back in 2017, she wanted to include a drought-tolerant garden. Little did she realise back then just how important such projects could be in the coming years.
When I created this gravel garden, I really had no idea how relevant it was going to be with the climate change and what is happening in our world now.
The British are known for their love of gardens, but not all of the plants which are popular here can survive if climate change brings hotter temperatures and regular droughts.
What are your top tips for drought-tolerant plants?
The artichoke is fantastic, grows tall, loves the Mediterranean climate and heat.
And you can eat it?
You can, absolutely. The lavender, again, a Mediterranean plant that tolerates dryness.
Other plants include white-flowered gaura, the herb oregano, and the butterfly-loving verbena. But keeping the soil moist doesn't come cheap.
So there's a membrane under here.
There is.
Gates had to lay a rubber membrane over the soil, then cover it with gravel to help keep in the moisture. So far this year, she hasn't had to water this part of the garden at all. Southern England is also home to a growing number of vineyards, where free-draining chalk and limestone soils are similar to several French wine-growing regions.
The warmer weather brought on, it's believed, by climate change is helping to improve the quality of English wine. And it's the dry weather and drought which is having the most impact.
Here we've got 6 varieties, and this is the Chardonnay.
The Chardonnay grapes.
So winemakers like drought because there's less water for the vines to sit in and also less water for the vines to uptake, making the grapes more concentrated in sugars, thus sweeter and better for the winemaker.
Stoppard Vineyard produces around 35,000 bottles of wine a year. It's been a wet July, so the 2023 harvest won't be quite as exceptional as last year's. 2022 saw extreme heat and a severe drought across much of the UK, with many reservoirs almost running dry. While drought-tolerant gardens may become more common, along with better quality English wines, these positives could be outweighed by the impact of prolonged severe droughts on agriculture and food supplies. Michael Voss, CGTN, West Sussex.
As Ukraine's counteroffensive against the Russian forces continues, representatives from both sides have condemned attacks carried out far from the center of the fighting.
Russia has blamed Ukraine for a drone attack on a skyscraper in Moscow. The drone is a weapon that both sides are using more away from the front line. Our correspondent Yolo Abdavid reports.
The battlefield in southeast Ukraine. Army volunteers pushing forward, trying to regain what they see as their national territory. The fighting is hard, with casualties mounting on the use of drones. They've been used without identification, as well as by their regular army units in the field.
Any movement to the right or left significantly changes how your drone flies, especially as the enemy has a highly developed electronic warfare system, and it causes a lot of inconvenience. You can't work from the same position many times because the enemy reacts to it and jams our drones. So we're constantly looking for new targets and fly the drones from different positions.
Even in war zones, people want respite. Ukrainians with a limited choice of destinations are holidaying where they can. The coast and rivers are too dangerous to visit, But at this estuary, near Mykolaiv, it's the natural habitat that's now under threat by people this summer trying to forget the war.
The main problem isn't the tourists themselves, but their cars and tents. They're placed in a chaotic way. The tourists don't know where it's all right to leave a car and where it is not, so they park wherever they want. That's how plants and the vegetation are being destroyed, and the noise affects the birds nesting here.
People want to relax when and where they can, while camping while their country is at war. As well as rebuilding towns and cities, Ukraine's natural environment will also need more protection the longer the conflict continues. Yolo David, CGTN.
Our correspondent Isabel Nakiria is in Moscow. Isabel, what has the Kremlin said about this latest drone attack in Moscow?
The Defense Ministry says it destroyed 2 drones while the third hit a building in Moscow and damaged the 21st floor. No one was injured. This was the second time this building was being hit, the first time being on Sunday. And also the Foreign Affairs Ministry says has condemned the attack, saying comparing it to the 9/11 attacks in New York. The Human Rights Office, the UN Human Rights Office, condemned the attack too, saying such attacks should not be on civilian populations or urban population or populations that are densely populated. These attacks also come just a few days after President Zelensky made a video recording saying the attacks in Moscow are inevitable. And of course, he said that war was gradually coming to Moscow. And, the Kremlin has acknowledged that Moscow is under high risk and has said it's taking steps to, to thwart any more security risks by taking measures, but it did not mention what measures they were taking, and said the Defense Ministry has the expertise to mention the measures that were being taken.
Well, Isabel, Moscow also said it thwarted Ukrainian attacks on Navy and civilian ships in the Black Sea.
Yes, the Defense Ministry has also said that it stopped several drone attacks in in the Black Sea, saying that the warships and civilian ships there was an attempt to hit at their warships and the civilian ships. And it's also said that the civilian ships were heading towards Istanbul. But Ukraine says it does not attack civilian ships, mentioning that probably it does attack the warships. And it also signifies that the two sides are continually going to make counterattacks against each other, especially in the last few weeks when there have been attacks and counterattacks in the Black Sea and in the Crimean area peninsula.
Thanks, Isabel. That is our correspondent, Isabel Nakiria, in Moscow.
You're watching Global Business Europe. Still to come, we're with fans in London as England reach the knockout stages of the Football Women's World Cup with a comprehensive win over China.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. To the Football Women's World Cup now, and England have beaten China 6-1, securing their spot in the final 16.
It was a stunning start for England, their first goal coming in the 4th minute. China came out firing in the second half and got a goal back through a penalty. But the Lionesses were at the betting odds late after their first 2 matches ended in tied 1-0 wins. China are now out of the competition.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Siobhan McCall, who watched the match in South London. So, Siobhan, this has been a pretty big win for England.
Hi, Robin. Yes, I'm at a fan park in South London. It's a pop-up mall, and it's sort of become the unofficial base for England fans during big tournaments. That was no different today. Hundreds of fans packed into the benches behind me to see a really impressive England performance. There were some China fans too, but you won't be surprised to hear after the margin of defeat, they quietly left at the end. So China are out of the tournament. In fact, it's the first time that they've been knocked out in the group stage in any World Cup. So it's going to be hard to take. And the margin of England's victory is also going to be really frustrating for China, particularly when they won their last game. They were down to 10 women in that game, and they powered through. But what they had to do today was do something that they haven't done since 1999 and win back-to-back matches at the World Cup, and it just proved that bit too difficult. They did score, though, and then when that goal went in, the penalty, it felt like in the 10 minutes after, it really felt like they could get another goal, and that could have changed the whole face of the match, but it wasn't to be. But there were positives, and then they can take heart from this tournament. Maybe it just came that bit too soon for them after their impressive win in the Asian Women's Cup last year. I think that raised expectations. But we spoke to some football fans here, and they say that the future for the Chinese national team is bright despite the result.
There's some players that have been, testing our defenders, and also in their defence as well. There's a couple of players there that have been, impressed me a bit. So I think they could, in the future, go far. And obviously they were Asia Cup final winners, so, they are a good team.
Well, this is, I think, was going to be the toughest game for them in the group, but they did get the win already against Haiti.
For China, this is part of a longer-term strategy. They're looking to get back to the heydays in the 1990s in women's football when they were one of the top teams. But that is a long-term project, and it's 2035 that they're targeting to really make an impact back in the women's game. Well, there's been good signs, and they'll take heart from this. England, though, well, in their previous 2 games, they won them 1-0, and there was a feeling that those results were quite laboured. Not today. The real Lionesses showed up. They've only lost 1 of their last 34 matches going into this game, and it was more of the same. The confidence running through the team, and a sensational performance by Lauren James. And the majority of England fans here were rapturous in applause at the final whistle. They play Nigeria next in the round of 16, and they'll be hoping to show and continue this great form and show why they are one of the favourites for the tournament.
So, Siobhan, you say hundreds of fans watching the match alongside you. What was the atmosphere like during the game?
It was a really fantastic atmosphere, Robin. I think we all kind of have an opinion on what, a football fan watching, it can all be like, beer being thrown, quite raucous, particularly I'm talking when it comes to the men's game and, the Euro 2020 final, which England reached, really sticks in my mind for that. The fans I spoke to today were commenting on just how different this women's atmosphere was. It's so much more family-orientated. I think the organisers here really tried to make it a family festival. There were tickets available that were for families, 1 adult, 1 child, and food included. When we walked in, there was face painting, there was massages, which you just wouldn't see at a men's game. So it was really nice festival atmosphere. And it's just been a really good day. Everyone really friendly. And I think the key thing with the women's game, and what can make it a really unique proposition, is how it tries to make itself that bit more inclusive. Now, I'm not saying that the men's game isn't inclusive, but research after the Lionesses won Euro 2022 found that, fans who maybe hadn't watched football before feel a lot more confident going to a women's game and getting involved there. It's that bit quieter and stuff in terms of, no raucous fans. And I think fans today will be pleased with that, and a lot of them saying they'll be back for that Nigeria game.
Siobhan, thank you very much. That's our correspondent, Siobhan McCall, in South London.
In the other games, Denmark have defeated Haiti 2-0 in Perth to join England in the next round. Denmark started strongly with a 3rd-minute goal, and they kept up the pace throughout the match, finally adding a second near the end. The result ends a long drought for the Danes, who haven't reached the knockout stage since 1995.
Defending champions, the USA advanced to the knockout round after struggling in a tense 0-0 match with Portugal in Auckland. The world's #1 side needed a win or a draw to avoid elimination. They'll now face the winners of Group G in Melbourne on Sunday, which is very likely to be Sweden.
And the Netherlands scored an impressive 7-0 win over Vietnam. The Dutch go through to the knockout stage, claiming top spots in Group E. They'll play the Group G runners up in Sydney on Sunday.
Now, an Estonian runner has become famous in China, even before setting foot on the track at the World University Games in Chengdu. Denis Salmijanow has over 2 million fans in the country. Our correspondent Xu Xinchen explains why.
Holes maybe for the
trained to become a dentist.
Especially I'm a fan of the traditional clothes, so
with a passion for clothes design.
Interesting for me. Of course, these will never get old. These are like Chinese traditional clothes that will be always respected and very beautiful.
24-year-old Denis Salmijanow is a runner from the Baltic state of Estonia. The runner had to overcome many difficulties to reach here. A 24-hour flight to reach China, and he had to get into a training camp to adapt to the hot weather in Chengdu. So how do you feel right now?
I feel amazing. I have food, I can rest and prepare for the competitions. Training camp was successful. Everything went according to the plan. Now it's just a matter of time to focus yourself and not to distract yourself with too much activities. And I think everything should be fine.
But why did you choose to come to the Phase 2 Games? Because if I am correct, that you even took like a training camp in order to adapt into the climate or the weather here.
It's all about title championships. These are not championships when you go on the one day and run with pacers. This is a race when you have tactics. It's not one day competition, it's 3 in a row. So if you want to compete in the Europeans or Olympics, you have to come to these kind of competitions to train and see how things go here.
Simply known as Denis on Chinese social media, the young European runner has garnered over 2 million followers by sharing running tips and training clips.
A lot of you have been asking me about my warm-up routine, and today I'll show you what my
2 million followers, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, about that, yeah, you're right, because when you see the number, it's just a number, but when you start meeting people, you start to realize that's a huge amount of people. I always wanted to share something or do something interesting, but couldn't find the right place for that. And once my friend from China told me, like, why don't you try to share some ideas for the people, because running is very popular in China. And then
things started to pick up from there. Dubbed as the ceiling for running poster, Denis quickly increased in popularity, and sports here played a very important role to bridge cultural differences.
Sport is one of the ways how we unite and unites people. This is, I would say, if person does sport, you immediately find so many common topics to discuss, and he understands you from a second.
Denis also told me he has been drawn to China's rich history and the country's technological advances. And when it comes to researching for technology, China has wowed him with its fast development.